The teacher who's teaching critical thinking wants to sort of direct the learner in a certain direction so that the learner will come to the same conclusion as the teacher.
In this video, critical thinking skills, can they really be taught? Steve Kaufmann expresses his suspicions towards teachers' abilities to teach critical thinking. Now, does that really mean that you cannot teach or learn critical thinking? I thought it would be a good idea to analyze Steve Kaufmann's arguments to see if we could find some common grounds or any details that we can learn a little bit more from. By the way, let me say one thing right off the bat. I kind of enjoy some of Steve Kaufmann's content. My French teacher recommended me the channel a while back, and I've been following it on and off since. I'm not a Kaufmann expert, but he's a remarkable figure in language learning. He speaks 20 languages. His YouTube channel has over 1 million subscribers and almost 2,000 videos where he shares insight and enthusiasm to make language learning accessible to all. Of course, having said all that, I don't have to share all his opinions. In fact, I don't. And I think he would be okay with that. Let's have a look at Kaufmann's arguments and see what type of conclusions we can reach at the end, and let's analyze.
Can critical thinking be taught? And how does that relate to language learning?
Okay, before I go on, yes, I understand that Kaufmann points out or discusses critical thinking from the perspective of language learning. But before you start calling strawman on me, I want to point out that the reason I analyzed this video is because Kaufmann often generalizes critical thinking in this video. His arguments pertain to critical thinking outside his specific domain, which is language learning. In these cases, I have opinions that differ from his. So now that we have that out of the way, let's continue.
I have always been very suspicious of the ability of the average teacher to teach critical thinking skills or higher order, if in fact such a thing exists, thinking skills.
Higher order, lower order, there are a lot of concepts that we should clarify. I understand that he talks about language learning here, but at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to start understanding these concepts. So what are higher order skills? Well, there are skills that are composed of smaller and simpler lower order skills. Let me explain it in the words of Tim van Gelder, an analytical skills consultant. Think about tennis, which is a higher order skills. To be able to play tennis, you must be able to do things like run, hit a forehand, hit a backhand, and watch your opponent. But mastering each of these things separately is not enough. You must be able to combine them into the coherent, fluid assemblies that make up a whole point. Likewise, critical thinking involves skillfully exercising various lower-level cognitive capacities in integrated wholes. Clearly, higher-order skills like critical thinking require lower-order skills. And learning higher-order skills is a time-consuming task. In that regard, let's also remember that Kaufmann mentions the ability of the average teacher to teach critical thinking skills. Let's remember this because I'll come back to this in a moment.
Teacher, I have always felt that the most important sort of prerequisite for critical thinking is knowledge of the subject matter. You cannot judge, because part of this whole critical thinking is that people need to be better equipped to judge what's true or not true in the media and so forth, which is all fine and dandy. We should be a little skeptical about what we read, and we should be trying to read through and see what we agree and what we don't agree with. However, in most cases, the positions that we hold are based on our emotions. We jump to a conclusion and then we try to justify that conclusion. I do that. Everyone does that. If we didn't all do that, we'd all arrive at the same conclusion because we would follow some rational method of critical thinking and, objectively evaluate all the information, and we'd arrive at the only correct conclusion. But there is no only correct conclusion. There's lots of different conclusions.
All right, let's stop there. Okay, that might often be the case that we direct our conclusions based on our emotions. But remember also that if we practice awareness and critical thinking, we can counter these emotion-filled conclusions. With critical thinking, we can learn to analyze and evaluate evidence, identify biases, and reason logically, to consume information more objectively and make more rational decisions and conclusions. Think of scientists, for example. We carry a lot of emotions, biases, ideologically motivated opinions. But we should leave these emotions or values aside, even when the results contradict our preferred or favorite outcome, which is of course easier said than done. But nevertheless, years of practicing scientific thinking and critical thinking can give you an edge in reasoning, objectivity, and problem solving. But he also says that if we didn't use emotional rationalization, we'd all arrive at the same conclusion, the one and only correct conclusion. I'm a little bit confused about this part, and maybe this is something that we can discuss more in the future, because some conclusions are inherently more accurate than others, right? How does this argument of his discard critical thinking or emphasize more knowledge in the subject matter?
Generally speaking, the more knowledgeable a person is about a particular subject, the more I value their opinion. I don't think you can somehow skip the stage of, just as in language learning, acquiring words and phrases. You can't speak before you have a lot of words and phrases in you. Until you have good comprehension, you're not going to speak well. Well, until you have read a lot on a subject or experienced that situation, acquired a lot of information and knowledge and experience about that subject, your opinion is perhaps not that important.
All right, it's of course true that the more you know about the subject, the more versatile you are in that subject. But it's not necessarily always the case that I would immediately value somebody's opinion just because they have read a lot about this topic. Like I've said before, critical thinking involves transdisciplinary abilities to evaluate evidence, identify biases, recognize logical fallacies, construct arguments, and reevaluate opinions where needed. I met a lot of academics who excel in their topic matter, but who struggle to form opinions whenever they encounter irregularities or complexities in real-life events. As soon as they encounter this, they freeze, they choke. Often we can develop, reevaluate, and correct our thoughts if we can adapt to new circumstances and evidence. For example, using higher order skills like critical thinking or scientific thinking. This is just to caution against following book-smart people's opinions by default. Also, sharpening our critical thinking skills can give us an edge when we learn new things. Of course, it depends on our learning aims. The foundational principles of critical thinking are general, universal, but we can apply them in highly topic-specific scenarios. Having general critical thinking abilities doesn't mean that you can think critically about all the topics in the world. But if we assume two individuals who have the same topic-specific skill level, we would maybe expect that the one with trained critical thinking skills will have an easier time learning a subject in depth than a critical thinking naive person. Anyway, let's go on.
The teacher who's teaching critical thinking wants to sort of direct the learner in a certain direction so that the learner will come to the same conclusion as the teacher. And so that this whole teaching of critical thinking, in effect, becomes a way of controlling what the learner thinks. And I think there's already too much control by teachers. In other words, this is the book you're supposed to read. This is the newspaper you should read. This is a subject matter you should read, is sort of the teacher directing the student.
Controlling the opinions and thoughts of your students, it's absolutely not the right approach to use when you teach critical thinking. In fact, it's the opposite of that. You teach the students to acquire their own opinions based on the evidence that they have, the biases that they spot, or the fallacies that they commit themselves or they spot on other people. And this is where we encounter the issue with the average teacher. As Kaufmann accurately points out, the average teacher lacks the ability to teach critical thinking. In fact, if we look at the school scenario for a moment, much of the criticism against teaching critical thinking as a general topic at schools is that they have found school programs limited success in transferring those skills between topics. Like any other skill that takes time to learn, Critical thinking requires structured and deliberate practice. A drawback of these studies that measure critical thinking skills in students and their transferability might be in the experimental setups that they use. Often these studies look at students' test result and evaluate the success of critical thinking transferability. We can ask ourselves, were the teachers or professors proficient in critical thinking? Was the transferability highlighted and taken seriously? Did the courses emphasize the importance of a mindset change? Did the students have enough time to learn the higher order skills? Well, I stick my neck out and say that the answer to all or most of these questions is probably no.
It's possible that there are people who are expert at critical thinking, who are, methodical and follow the scientific method and pursue a variety of different sources of information and then apply very, consistent, rational methods for arriving at their conclusions. I still suspect they're going to be, it'll be flavored by their prejudice preconceived idea going in. But people who can do that is a small minority. The vast majority of people don't have those skills, and therefore the vast majority of teachers are not in a position to teach those skills. And I don't really think those skills exist outside of what we call domain knowledge about the subject matter. And to get that good knowledge of the subject matter, you have to read a lot. So the focus should be on getting students to read more.
All right, that was basically the end conclusion of his video, and that's fine. But think about it. Imagine people who master martial arts or math or storytelling. These people are what he calls a small minority as well. It doesn't minimize the ability to learn these skills, which for the record, I understand Kaufmann didn't imply here either. But nevertheless, anyone can learn critical thinking with the right tools, methods, and mindset. And I agree with Kaufmann's worry that language teachers might not have the right tools, resources, or time to teach critical thinking. As a result, focusing excessively on critical thinking might be a waste of time in the context of language learning. But that depends on your aims, of course. I guess I don't fully agree with Kaufmann's arguments about critical thinking, mostly also because we might have different purposes with critical thinking. At a language learning level, he might be right. Critical thinking, which is a higher order skill set, takes time to learn. And the same is true for language, which is another higher order skill set. It also takes a lot of time to learn. So you might be better off focusing on learning the language rather than focusing primarily on critical thinking. However, I think that confusion here lies in that Kaufmann's video can be interpreted as a general recommendation. I don't think that his arguments here are solid enough to discourage critical thinking learning or teaching at a general level. General thinking skills can make you a faster and more motivated learner, and this is true even for languages. According to my understanding and experience, the right conditions can teach us to think more outside of the box and to adapt to new information. But what are the right conditions? Check this video out. Let me know if you have any questions and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and Kaufmann if you want. Give me a like, it helps a lot. But until next time, peace.